Welcome all the viewers out there to the Arraya Solutions Vodcast. As in previous topics, we've assembled a group of leading experts in their field to discuss various topics. And our topic today is going to be focused around the biggest tech stories of 2020 and what we think will be big in 2021. Today's panelists consist of a group of my peers at Arraya. As a reminder, I'm Chuck Kiesling. I'm the Senior Director of Infrastructure Pre-Sales at Arraya. And joining me are Ron Longley, the Director of Data Center Solutions. Welcome back, Ron. Scott Bryan, who is the Director of our Cybersecurity Practice, a topic that is on everyone's mind these days. And Chris Bavasso, who is our Director of Application Services. And that is also a topic that, if it isn't on your mind, might be after today. Thanks for joining, guys.
Thanks for being here.
Let's jump right in. Ron, you were recently here, so again, welcome back. Traditionally, in your space, it tends to be a little bit static, right? So a majority of those people stay in their lane. This is what I know. This is what I'm going to kind of stick with. And they just build upon that year over year based on their growth and initiatives. Is that your experience? Have you seen a shift at all this year? Do you predict there's going to be any changes coming into next year with that?
So certainly, thanks again for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here. To touch on that topic, traditionally, as we meet with customers, in the data center space, the silos were typically there. You would meet with folks that would be the server team, the storage team, the virtualization or compute team. And those were pretty much distinct areas for many years, right? And I think we've started to see that kind of breakdown. More and more of our opportunities within the traditional data center space are less of that three-tier architecture and more of that software-defined data center with hyperconverged, both in the appliance space and the build your own space. So, in that mindset, the VMware generalist or the admin there becomes more important. They're doing more networking and storage and compute and virtualization and touching all of those areas in that space. So we've already seen that shift, prior to COVID. And I don't think that's going to, reverse. There's still going to be a spot for that three-tier architecture in the traditional data center space, but we're seeing less and less of that.
So do you think that's a major shift, a minor shift this year? And you kind of mentioned that you've seen it prior, right? Has it accelerated? Is it staying the same?
Again, in that traditional data center space, we're not really even touching on, cloud and hybrid cloud, but in that traditional data center space, again, that shift started before COVID. I don't think it's really accelerated it. To be honest with you, I haven't noticed that in that traditional data center space. The strong VMware virtualization team in that traditional space really has a bigger seat at the table. We've all been in the spot where we like to turn the knobs, right? The complicated storage systems where we get to geek out and tweak cache and RAID and stripe settings and pool settings. You're seeing less and less of that now. So maybe the folks that were dedicated to doing those tasks, need to change their skill set, right? So again, that had already started happening pre-COVID and continues to evolve. You're seeing less and less, traditional storage arrays out there. And again, that's why it's important for that VMware team, that quote unquote generalist, to be stronger, right? And evolve their skill sets to keep up with the changing trends.
Do you feel like we're starting to see more of a shift into where a lot of these admins that were traditionally that guy, right? Like that VMware person, that storage person. Do you think it's going to become this environment where pretty much everybody that is an administrator at an organization is going to have to be more of a generalist, and then organizations are going to start looking outside for that specialist?
Certainly, again, you go back to the old silos, the person that was just responsible for, tier one storage arrays. If that's a shrinking footprint within the data center, their skills need to evolve, right? They need to become more proficient in the VMware space, in that generalist space. Again, we are just focused on that traditional data center. And as we touched on before, most folks are going to end in that hybrid cloud configuration. Less and less that we're going to see that folks have one or two data centers of their own, quote unquote, private cloud. So that, storage specialist has to, evolve into like a VMware generalist in the data center space. And then if you add, public cloud and, things like VMC and AWS and Azure VMware solutions, VMware touching the public cloud, their skill sets need to evolve in that space as well.
So Chris, I see that you might have a comment here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm curious because to me, when you're talking about converging and being more of a generalist, there's more of a need for someone who not only understands the nuts and bolts of the technology, but also of the business processes and the workflow and, the why you're there rather than the, the how and the what. So I'm curious, Ron, do you feel that those folks are becoming more and more required to know the business or more focused on a general overview of the technology components, even kind of discrete from the business processes that they support?
I think everybody in the IT data center space needs to have some business acumen, right? They need to have an appreciation as to why are they keeping the lights on? Why are they deploying new technology, right? You're there for a reason. The business is relying on you to keep up with their ever-changing needs to stay competitive within their industry. So, and that's all different levels of IT data center, admin up through management and directors, right? Obviously, as senior management has a more of a seat at the table with business and lines of business owners, but even the lowest level admin needs to have an understanding as to, again, why they're there and what applications and workloads they're supporting. So.
I think one of the big shifts I've seen on that note, right, is the movement of the IT management apps, right, the data center tools, the operational tools to SaaS environments, right, to cloud environments. So, that the overhead of running a data center used to have a significant footprint inside the data center itself. With that change, right, it really opens the door for a lot of other options for the folks that we're supporting. And from a security perspective, it helps and hurts, right? It moves, it kind of moves some liabilities. It gives us a background or a backup, a known continuity, right, with our tools, our operational tools. System information is less at risk of a catastrophic event in the data center, et cetera. That said, I'm curious, what other, besides those tools, what are you seeing customers move out of the data center? And actually, more importantly, what do they tend to want to hold on to on-prem?
Yeah, so for, Chuck, be familiar with this talk track, right? It's a common theme of mine, right? You talk about workloads, right? And that's really what it comes down to, workloads and data. Where are you going to run them? How are you going to support them? How are you going to protect them? If something bad happens to them, how do you recover from that? So, it goes back to the three premises there, right? The laws of physics, right? Big chunks of data are really slow to move around, and typically you need to have compute near them to do things with them, right? So that's going to help drive, where those workloads and where that data lives. Economics, right? Is it cheaper to run static workloads in my own data center? Many times, yes. For things like variable workloads that are bursty and have peaks and valleys, and you can spin them down when you don't need them. The cloud makes a lot of sense from an economics point of view. And then the laws of governance, right? Governance and security. If you have a customer that says that are working under a certain set of laws or rules that say this data these workloads cannot sit in a public cloud, they have to be in your own data center. Well, that's easy. That's an easy conversation. So, a lot of companies and customers have a mindset of, if I can replace a complex 3-tier app with a SaaS offering and it checks 80% of the boxes, I'm going to do that, right? I spent a lot of time in my early career at Arraya implementing solutions to support multiple terabyte exchange environments, selling storage, selling backup, selling compute. I can't remember the last time that really I had to architect a solution for an on-prem Exchange environment. That workload is just gone, right? And that's just a prime example. Not gone, but in a different spot. That's not a traditional data center spot. It's really a SaaS play.
Sure, but in 2010, that might have had the biggest footprint in your data center.
Yeah, we sold a lot of storage and backup solutions to support those multi-terabyte Exchange environments. That's just one example. Yep.
How big's your mailbox? My wife still has to archive her mailbox. They're not on O365 yet. And she's
Nice.
every Friday, she's like, I have to clean out my inbox, and I just laugh. Like, what year is it?
That causes so many more problems too. Where does that PST go? Where does it live? How do you archive it? How do you audit it?
Right, but see, that also kind of brings up a really good point, and I'm going to kind of direct this to you, Scott. So when I look at cybersecurity, right, and I feel like my view of cybersecurity is kind of similar to the way that a lot of our customers look at it, in which that cybersecurity is kind of like that wrapper, right? That is the warm and fuzzy, that is the concrete ball that you want to put around all of your stuff. So do you agree with that? Would you prefer that people have a different view of that? And, do you feel like, especially today, given that we no longer have that four walls and a roof as the boundary, should cybersecurity be part of any and every conversation when we're talking about any change to a workload?
Right. So, I'll take the first part, right? The wrapper question and everything being wrapped together. And if I agree with that. So, yes, I think, what we're seeing with customers is I would say about 50% of customers that we're engaging with, right, that are talking about cloud journeys, are looking at it as an opportunity to beef up their cybersecurity. The other 50% are in the cloud and they need to beef up their cybersecurity. And it's constantly driving and being driven by industry changes and by geopolitical situations and economics, right? So, when we talk about security, it's a feeling. It's something that isn't really quantifiable with a calculation. It's unique to each environment, to each customer, to each person, right? What makes you feel safe and secure in your house is different than even what maybe makes your wife feel safe and secure in the same exact house. So when we really have to engage directly with the businesses and the business owners and champions to understand what the critical assets are in the environment, what risks they already have accounted for, and maybe try to fit into that mindset, and then really bridge that gap, right, to IT, where we communicate those business needs that are related to make the business feel secure, right, and maybe check some boxes on some compliance forms, et cetera. But we have to, cyber really has to translate those business requirements into technical outcomes and work with the technical folks, right? I think because it's ingrained in the IT, a lot of times technical folks have been burdened with this expectation that they consider it and fold it in to everything they do, and that it's there's negligence involved, and really, pivoting just right from talking about data center. As this evolution started in digital transformation, right, security was maintained. Cybersecurity was maintained with a layer 1 cable. You unplugged it. You locked the door. You powered the machine off. You put the punch card in a safe, right? And that evolved. And now we have the internet, and people now can remote access in. But we have only a few amount of people can do that. And the tools and the devices you would need to even be able to do that are not common. So security was really sort of grew out of obscurity in a lot of ways, right? In the early days of remote connectivity, the tribal knowledge of how to find IP addresses and open ports and CVEs, et cetera, wasn't out there. So you really just kind of hoped, right, that you wouldn't get attacked or that you wouldn't get breached. I mean, you could literally just type a phone number in it and potentially call a bank back then, right? So, and now everything's connected. everything, and it's such a cliche now, right? But to say it's a wrapper is a good description, because now that everything's connected, everything's wireless. I'm charging my phone wirelessly right now while we're recording this over the air, right? So how do I secure the devices in this mix? There has to be a digital solution to that, because there isn't a wire to unplug or a device to turn off. So, that said, when we look at those other controls we used to put in place, locking doors, strong passwords, really we're just looking at proliferating. Let's edit that. Proliferating those security controls. So really what we're looking at is proliferating those security controls that we know need to be done across the board, right, on all the assets, and making sure we have ways to audit and track our devices, because that's another big element. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, that kind of that makes an interesting point, because I was reading something where it kind of feels like one of the bigger topics coming up, and they were a little specific around facial recognition, but I'll generalize it a little bit in biometrics, right? Where they're saying, especially in the financial services, facial recognition has become more and more available, and I notice even for me personally, I don't use my password for most of these applications. Do you feel like biometrics is going to grow and should be considered, if it's not in a lot of these organizations, to help some of that?
So, wow, that is a huge question. And I made that face and kind of rolled like that because I really, it's a huge question. So I have a lot of thoughts and comments around that. What I'll say, and maybe to pull Chris into this conversation, right, is biometrics and user behavior is 100% going to be the way we're identified, probably as early as now, right? And so when we integrate applications, right, behavior in applications, the way we use the applications, what applications we use, how we use them, and we connect that also with the way we might hold our phone and what hand we hold it in, the position of it, for that matter, it could even come down to the rate of your heart being within a certain threshold that's common, right, for the watch you have on to identify it's you. That will be how we are authenticated by 2030. Anything that you need to prove who you are to will know who you are by how you hold your phone and all your biometrics through a sensor you carry with you all day.
Okay, everybody. So Scott just set the bar. We were going to talk 2021. Now we're going to 2030.
Well, I'll give you an example, right? So if you go to the New York Stock Exchange, there is not a locked PC on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. You can walk up to one and grab a mouse and move it, and it knows it's not you, because they all are tuned to only allow the traders that are authorized to use them, and their specific biometric signature is allowed to use those devices.
Ed, Scott, I'm curious. So I've always viewed biometrics as more like a username than a password, right? So at what point does biometrics replace the need for multi-factor authentication, where we can completely rely on the machine learning capability of the system to define who we are without any other human created input?
So just not to split hairs and correct you one spot, right? So it won't replace MFA. It will become a authentication factor option, right? So it will just enhance MFA. So there are a few firms right now that are really pioneering this space, and it takes a huge data lake, right? A huge data lake. The one that I'm most familiar with actually uses Azure services to garner AI, right? So that technology exists today. American Express uses it. MasterCard uses it. It's there. It's actually being used probably right now on the bank apps that you have on your phone, and you don't even know it. Now, the next step is really going to be when it actually authorizes you, right? And that's really going to be on the risk evaluators to determine when they can trust it, right, to that level of certainty that there isn't that extra input needed. But yeah, it's real. It's out there. It takes around 500,000 data point users, if you will, in a data lake to really pull intelligence out of it to understand the differences in, like, for instance, the way you walk, right? And literally you can track the gait of one individual versus another based on the bio data from their phone. And biometrics is not the right word, Chris. I'm trying to think of the right. It's I'm gonna have to look it up. Sorry.
It's all right.
No, but
right.
Historically, the example I always use is it's not just about the password that you put in, but it's how you put it in, right? So your cadence of your typing, things of that nature too, that will be part of the experience of authenticating the user. And I think one of the things that you talked about is having these security conversations at a really high level. And I think one of the things that's really important is to not make those conversations discrete. So, bringing it to applications, I think every project that we do, every conversation that we have has a component of non-functional requirements, which relates directly to governance, compliance, security, permissions. So it has to be living and breathing across all of the projects and implementations you do. You just can't sit in a big room once a month and say, yeah, we're going to be really secure. You have to live it. You have to breathe it. Otherwise, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. You're just checking a box, which I think sometimes can be the trap that people fall into.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, you made some points, right, where you talked about, like, where we were, where we are, right? So I'm going to kind of direct this to Chris a little bit. I feel like in your world, right, a lot of times what you're doing is more about future looking, what can I do, the art of the possible. Given, some of the points that Scott had made, things that you're seeing, conversations that you're having, what do you think is going to become the most prominent in 2021 for you? And the cybersecurity piece behind it, and some of the news that's recently come out, do you feel like that's going to change any of your conversations?
Well, I think that you can't talk about 2021 without having the context of 2020, right? So obviously 2020 has been a paradigm shift for a lot of companies, for a lot of people. And some people were further along that journey and kind of were able to assimilate the remaining components of that journey. But a lot of people kind of put something together quickly so that they can keep working. And I think the idea of return to work is kind of proliferate across 2021. What does that mean for each company, for each division, possibly even each process or workflow? So, historically, obviously, lots of workflows, lots of divisions presumed a standard office, a standard workflow required people to be in the same room, or there was some component of a process that was, not digital at that point. There was a piece of paper involved, or there was some type of, I walk over to you and I say, hey, I got one of these, Chuck, and you then take it and run with it. So how do you then take that? And I think the cat's out of the bag for a lot of people working remotely. I don't think it's going to go back to what it was completely. And that's going to be different, like I said, to every company, even every division, as I said before. So I think 2021 is going to be about how do we handle that appropriately? What does our return to work look like? And how is that going to impact the longer term version of the processes and workflows that we're used to? It's okay to say, look, we can kind of grin and bear it for 6 months and say, all right, for the next half a year, we'll figure out how it's going to work. But to do it permanently, that's a whole other different conversation. What does that mean? What does that look like? So I think having those conversations around what does your use case look like now? What's changed in 2021 that you didn't think was going to change in 2019? And then taking that change and saying, okay, well, we have our current state, we have our defined future state, and what's the delta between? How are we going to get there, right? do we have to automate things? Are we using more RPA? Are we using more notification and alerting versus kind of the, being in the same room process, right? So that grassroots process that's been ingrained in a company for decades and has never changed because it never had to, might now need to permanently change. And I think the technology that we have in our back pocket are really just, arrows in our quiver, and we have to be able to pull them out and say, I understand your operational, your operation is going to change, a lot of the different ways. How can we make that change possible? How can we automate? How can we make things more efficient? I think that's going to, as I said, I think that's going to be, from the application perspective, from the user perspective, that's the story of 2021.
What are your thoughts, Ron?
Yeah, I think Chris touched on some interesting topics, right? Everybody our customers had their plans for 2020 and the projects that they had on the slate, and that maybe we were engaged to help them with, maybe specific to the data center space. February and March happened, and then everything was kind of turned on its head. For a lot of the customers that weren't mature in supporting a remote workforce or a significant remote workforce, had to do a lot of things quickly, right? Was everything done right, or was it done enough to support the shift, right? So I think 2021 is going to be a bit of, let's reevaluate what we did to make those changes in 2020. Did we do it right? Or is it secure? Are we paying too much? Can we do it more efficiency? We had to move quick and throw this into the cloud. Does it make sense to keep it there? Do we take some of it back? So I think we're going to have a lot of those conversations in 2021 of, I had to scramble last year. Did I do everything right? Am I secure? Am I vulnerable? Am I spending too much? I see a lot of those conversations coming up.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned a really good point. And honestly, Scott, I'm going to throw a random question to you, just because this was something that I was reading that I feel like ties almost all of this together. There's a term that I'm seeing more and more often, and that's cybersecurity mesh. And the way that I'm understanding of what it is it's basically an organization's ability to get to any digital security asset, regardless of its location. And it just allows individuals to put that security divider around people within the whole organization. Is that something you're hearing? Is it new?
I mean, the term's, I think, fairly new. The concept is not, right. The idea of if you control the digital asset, you control the asset, the laptop, whatever, right, and you can control the data on it, and access to it, and therefore that's gives you a level of security. The reality is that physical loss of that device, which is now more likely, and probably I don't have any stats to pontificate on, right, but is probably significantly higher in this work from home era. That changes the game, because one of the things that this entire remote work shift has depended on is a privileged employee group that all had internet at home with good connections and devices they could use, right? There are a ton of people that we're not talking about that are not in the mix here because they don't live in areas that could even be viable to work from home, because they have 640 down, 128 up DSL, from 2005 still. That said, because of that, right, it puts a strain on organizations. How can you maintain the location and the maintenance of a device that you don't have connectivity to, right? So with the new hardware capabilities that are available with security chips and GPS tracking and LTE modems built right into small form factor devices, there's nothing really to stop us from doing that. There's just the cost, right? So you can never. I think the lowest monthly fee per device I've come across, just for a non-data heavy LTE connection, right, from management, is about $10 a month. So those numbers go that gets exponentially high, right, when you start talking about large environments, and that's why it's a risk calculation. That said, there's other ways to to address it. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think, the idea of tracking your assets, knowing where they are, is the first and foremost part of any security program. If you don't know what your assets are, knowing your vulnerabilities is only as valuable as knowing what they're on, right?
Chris, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, so I'm actually curious, Scott. So like, if I remember the wave of BYOD, right? When everybody started having their own mobile devices, and everybody was like, "Well, I don't want to carry a BlackBerry anymore, and I have this device, and I don't want to have my look like Batman with my utility belt." And IT had to figure out how to allow those people to have their own device connect to those corporate resources, and the birth of MDM. And I wonder how, if at all, this is different from that in that sense. Like, we kind of all navigated that path. And is this just kind of an extension of that, or is this kind of some fundamental difference?
It's actually a difference, a fundamental difference, right? So BYOD really was a response to shortcomings in IT, in my opinion, right? And we're all part of that, right? IT was not interested in the complicated network support requirements to bring iPhones on with certificates and manage web browsing and content filtering and all that for these devices. But employees were not happy that we wouldn't let them use them. So we said, fine, use your own. We don't care. Right. It was really a lazy management response, in my opinion, from IT. And we learned over what happens when you're lazy. Oh, man, a lot of risk is associated with people using their own. Right. Oh, and there's also a management overhead there, too, because if they can't join the corporate LAN with their phone, but they can join the guest LAN with their phone, but they can't get to the corporate email from the guest LAN, then what? Right, et cetera. So it created all these It created all these other issues. Not to mention, it created in scenarios when I was doing security testing, numerous times there was misconfigurations that would create bridges, right, between like an open guest network or poorly secured guest network and that's it. So this is kind of the anti that, right? This is the response to that problem. This is saying, well, now devices are commoditized, right? So I can get you a $300 Chromebook, pop a LTE chip in it, and just add another $10 to the chargeback cost I have for you as a user anyway, to the business, right? And I don't ever have to worry about you, risky user, again, right? I have my device under control.
Yeah. The differences there are nuanced, but really interesting to talk through. Because the end result to the end users probably feels very similar.
Yeah, what's interesting too is that I think we had to, as a industry, we had to go through the pain of seeing what would happen if we let them use their own.
Sure.
To realize that it was worth just the reason why I supply phones and devices to my family, right? Because I don't want them buying their own, because then I have to fix them. That's how it works.
So, Chris, I'm gonna come to you really quick with a question. This is more of a statement, and I want to get your initial response on this. And I'm gonna warn you ahead of time. It's loaded with some buzzwords. So
I love buzzwords.
Coronavirus is changing firms' automation plans quickly towards back office processes and business strength. Intelligent automation will represent the infusion of robotic and digital process automation with pragmatic AI and low-code tools. Initial response.
Sure. No, it's what I said before, right? Those mundane tasks that we took for granted before now have to be updated and matured. And I think people never wanted to do that before because maybe there was no point of pain. And I think a lot of companies, it's the squeaky wheel syndrome, right? If it's not painful, even though we know we're doing it a ridiculous way, we'll just throw people at the problem. That's fine. That's not a big deal. Now you can't do that anymore. I think also the whole RPA and process automation thing has been going around for a long time. Every platform that is ubiquitous to some degree, if it's SharePoint or Office 365, there's or Salesforce, whatever it may be, there's always a component of workflow automation, process automation. So that has been, I think, prolific for a while. So to say that it's going to, kind of get its tentacles into some processes that otherwise wouldn't have been automated is fair. And I think it's about time that businesses kind of stop doing things because that's always how they were being done. That is probably something the four of us have heard 1,000 times. Well, it's always how we've done it. Well, now you can't. And so let's do a better way to do it. And, the pragmatically speaking, it makes a lot of sense. You probably should have done it already, is I guess my point. You probably should have started that already. The fact that you haven't, now you're forced to.
So you feel like this is going to spark almost like a reevaluation of people's automation roadmaps?
I think so. And I think it's going to go further down the human process cycle there, where you have more things that were not touched prior to 2020 that now need to be touched. I think approvals are something that is really going to be cumbersome in the future because you don't have people who are right now not even in the same space. But in the future, again, take it 1 degree farther, where now if you say to your employees, we're going to be virtual from now on. Well, now what's stopping Scott from moving to Wisconsin or to Hawaii or to Japan? And so now those workflows, those automations need to span not only, local geography, but global geography too. So having the ability to manage those types of workflows, those approval processes at a very finely tuned level is going to be really important. Whereas before you could just kind of email Scott and he'll say, yeah, that's fine. Now you can't do that because you might not get an answer for 8 hours. And I think those are the conversations that are going to be had as soon as businesses decide what does their return to work look like. Because I think most businesses are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So Ron, I mean, you've been involved in the data center space for a long time. A lot of things that you have implemented have their own processes. I mean, what are your thoughts to that overall conversation?
Yeah, the topic of automation in the data center space is an interesting one, right? Every year, kind of like VDI, every year is the year of automation or the year of VDI, right? A lot of customers, if they have a static environment and they're not provisioning a lot of workloads, and it's just a VM here or there, then an expensive, complex automation project maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. But where automation and consistency and standards make a lot of sense is just lifecycle management, right? Patching, adding new servers or retiring old servers. And now with automation, provisioning workloads and making a decision do I provision it on-prem or in some form of a cloud? Automation adds a lot of agility in that space, and it goes back to the topic we hit on before is, enabling the business, right? Spending weeks, trying to figure out how this upgrade is going to happen or how this patch process is going to work, and having it be done manually and putting all that effort into it doesn't do a lot of assistance or lending to business competition, right? If more of that is standard and automated and, the teams are spending less time doing that, again, more efficient, more time spending on business initiatives and, increasing the competitive edge of whatever industry you're in.
If I could add to that really quickly, I think the same goes for homegrown applications. So modernizing those applications because they were lazy before or because they're legacy where they required everybody to be in the same space. Now they can't be. So that modernization is going to be crucial to those now dispersed workflows and processes that are reliant on them. And I think that's another piece to the puzzle that companies are going to have to deal with. Our apps are old. They're client server, they're fat clients. How do we deal with that? And, application modernization projects are great, but they're not easy or quick. So, that's going to be a challenge in 21 too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you guys, this has been a really great conversation for me, and we're getting close to time here. So I want to wrap up with one question, right? And every year, there's always somebody that puts one of these blog posts out, and this is one of these years where I kind of struggle to find that thing. So I'm going to ask you guys, and we'll kind of go around the table, and I'll start with you, Ron. Disruptive technologies. Do you feel this year there's any disruptive technologies, or do you feel like this very well could just be a year where it is about disruptive processes?
Well, I think 2020, again, we go back to what happened in January, February, March, put everybody's, plans on hold, right, and shifted their priorities. There were maybe a lot of, data center components that were due to be refreshed or replaced or quote unquote modernized in 2020. And, we had to support a new remote workforce with a struggling economy. And, hey, we're just going to renew maintenance and just keep the lights on that old gear. That stuff doesn't go away. That problem doesn't go away. It becomes more important in 2021. So I think we're going to see a good bit of, circling back on those projects that were put on hold. From a disruptive technology point of view, and we want to, talk buzzwords, right? That app modernization and, where does Kubernetes fit into customers' plans? Either they're doing it now, or everything you read within the next 2, 3, 5 years, you're going to be doing it, right? Replacing those legacy, cumbersome 3-tier architectures with a more modern container-based solution. I think you're going to see more and more of those conversations in 2021. And that's going to be driven by business and app owners, not necessarily by folks within the traditional IT space. So looking forward to those conversations in 2021.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of stole mine. Kubernetes and microservices, which is fine. You can have it. But, those are the things that are going to, I think, Chuck, your question about those are not discrete. I think, disruptive technologies and disruptive processes are kind of one and the same, where we have now a dispersed group of users who now need to use applications that were not designed to be that way, to delivered that way. So re-engineering those monolithic applications is going to be something that people are going to be hyper-focused on. And I think that's going to be the key to allowing their workforce to make the change to permanently be dispersed, which I think is going to be a lion's share of folks are going to be now kind of permanently, at least have the option to be where they choose.
And what about you, Scott?
I think the biggest story from a cyber perspective, anyway, is probably the most recent one. What we thought was a FireEye hack has now been revealed to be a supply chain hack that was really the result of SolarWinds being compromised in the supply chain and backdoors being inserted into its software that happens to manage the networks of some of our most critical federal agencies, military institutions, and corporations. So it's been established the target. FireEye was one of them, and there were other targets of SolarWinds customers that were targets of the supply chain hack. What this will do in 21 and the results it'll have, impact it'll have on 21 as top stories will be in 21. We now have a real world huge example of what a supply chain hack can do, right? There's been supply chain hacks going on for a considerable period of time. The Treasury Department issues warnings about them regularly, different, compromised components, et cetera, et cetera. We have export regulations. We're all familiar with what that looks like, conceptually. But now we saw a nation state be sophisticated and deliberate over a significant period of time to compromise the supply chain of a software manufacturer that supplies software to their targets, their military targets, right? Which is a big shift in the news. So that said, we're going to be talking a lot about software development lifecycle, secure programming, secure development, third-party risk management, third-party risk evaluations and assessments, understanding now, right? If you are the customer or the consumer of products from a company that uses SolarWinds, and that you're now at a different level of risk than you were when SolarWinds wasn't a compromised software solution. So I don't think the industry is really taking it all in yet, but there will also be significant fallout from ripping SolarWinds out, replacing it, I'm sure in multiple instances. Also, once the backdoors that were used by these attackers are known in the wild, the likelihood of mercenaries targeting vulnerable systems is high. So to bring that back home, bring it down to earth. What that means for us is, personally, it means that everybody should be aware that we're in a state of flux from the cybersecurity perspective, right? The industry is still struggling to do its job. Bottom line, it's not a great thing to have happen, right? When you're trying to promote security and confidence. So I've been calling out the industry for some time now that we have to look at ourselves harder and accept the fact that we are failing as an industry in protecting our customers, right? I mean, it's happening. So what can we do differently to get in front of that? But as smaller organizations and utilities and public entities try to understand what these hacks mean to them, if they weren't specifically targeted, it means that you need to be that being very deliberate and specific around your software choices, and also understanding where your third-party risk responsibilities lie inside of your organization. It's not an IT manager's job necessarily by default to evaluate the risk of a software solution or a third party that you might be partnering with. So as IT people, if you're watching this, engage your risk officers, engage your corporate legal services to preemptively get in front of an event like this that might impact your company. And now that it's in the news, the risk managers and the lawyers and such at your organizations won't wonder what you're talking about.
That's actually, honestly, Scott, that is probably the perfect way that we could end this one. I think that putting that public service message out there is perfect. I mean, and I'm glad that we got a chance to touch on that. Again, I appreciate.
Sorry, I went over it.
I appreciate the time that you guys put into this. Joining. Your opinions are extremely welcome, and I'm looking forward to having all of you back on again. Thank everybody for watching. As always, if there are topics that you want to hear about, let us know. We'd be happy to put something together for you. Thank you.